There are secrets hidden in plain sight that the enemy prays you never discover. What if I told you something you can eat can break chains that prayers alone have been fighting? Why do certain forces panic when this enters your body? Why has this truth been buried, silenced, ignored? An ex-insider once revealed, darkness fears what carries divine authority. Tonight you are about to uncover what hell never wanted you to know. You were never told this, but what enters your body can either empower light or give legal ground to darkness. This is where many battles are lost, not in prayer rooms, but at the table. Because the enemy understands something you were never taught. Consumption is spiritual. It is not just physical. It is not just nutritional. It is a doorway. There are foods, substances, patterns of eating that align your body with confusion, heaviness, and spiritual resistance. And then there are things ordained by God that carry authority. When they enter your system, they don't just nourish you, they confront darkness. This is why ancient believers were careful not just about what they prayed, but what they consumed. Because they knew your body is not neutral. It is either a vessel of power or a platform of attack. And here is where the deception began. The kingdom of darkness never needed to destroy you instantly. It only needed to weaken your authority slowly. Habits, through ignorance, through things that look harmless but carry spiritual consequences. You have seen it even if you didn't recognize it. Moments where you feel drained for no reason, heavy without explanation, disconnected even after prayer. You thought it was stress. You thought it was life. But what if something deeper was happening? There are patterns, repeated cycles that cannot be explained naturally. Financial stagnation, constant setbacks, opportunities slipping away. And behind many of these patterns, there is a spiritual root. Because when your spiritual sensitivity is lowered, you stop resisting what you should confront. You tolerate what you should reject. You allow access without realizing it. This is how witchcraft operates in subtle ways. Not always through rituals you can see, but through systems, habits, environments that keep you spiritually dull. Because a dull spirit is an unguarded territory. And an unguarded territory invites occupation. But here is the turning point. There are things created by God that carry cleansing properties. Not just for the body, but for the spiritual atmosphere around you. When taken with understanding, with intention, with spiritual awareness, they activate something deeper. They restore alignment. They sharpen discernment. They disrupt what was quietly operating against you. This is why certain traditions, certain ancient practices emphasized intentional consumption, because they understood your body is an altar. And whatever is placed on that altar speaks. It either speaks life or it gives permission to decay. You cannot fight spiritual battles while feeding your body things that weaken your resistance. It creates conflict. You pray for breakthrough, but your habits sustain limitation. You declare freedom, but your patterns reinforce bondage. And this is where many become frustrated, because they are sincere but misaligned, committed but unaware, fighting but not winning. Not because they lack faith, but because they lack revelation. But revelation changes everything. Because once you see, you cannot unsee. Once you understand, you cannot go back to ignorance. And this is where your authority begins to rise again. Because now you become intentional. Now you begin to question what you allow. Now you become aware of what strengthens you and what weakens you. And awareness is dangerous to darkness. Because darkness thrives in what you ignore. It survives in what you overlook. But once exposed, it loses its advantage. And here is what many don't realize. Spiritual warfare is not always loud. It is often quiet, strategic, patient, working behind the scenes, waiting for access. And access is often given through patterns you never questioned. But something is shifting now, because you are no longer passive. You are no longer unaware. You are beginning to see the connection between what you consume and what you experience, between what you allow and what manifests. This is not coincidence. This is alignment. And alignment determines outcome. If you align with life, you produce life. If you align with confusion, you experience confusion. It is that simple, but it is also that serious, because every day you are choosing, not just physically, but spiritually. And those choices, they build patterns, they establish outcomes, and over time they define your reality. This is why breaking cycles requires more than prayer alone. It requires awareness. It requires discipline. It requires intentional shifts. Because you cannot expect a different outcome while maintaining the same inputs. That is not faith, that is denial. Faith aligns, faith adjusts, faith responds to truth, and truth is what is being revealed to you right now. There is something powerful, something intentional, something spiritually significant that, when consumed with understanding, begins to break patterns, begins to restore clarity, begins to disrupt what has been operating unseen. But before you can use it, you must first understand why the enemy works so hard to keep you distracted, unaware, and disconnected from this truth. Because once you step into this awareness, everything begins to change. There is a reason certain natural things were always present in sacred moments. It was never random. It was never tradition alone. It was intentional. Because creation itself carries codes, assignments, and spiritual functions. And when you understand this, everything begins to make sense. The enemy does not fear what is popular. Enemy fears what carries truth. This is why the most powerful things are often the most ignored. Simple, accessible, yet spiritually potent. One of these has been sitting in plain sight yet rarely understood. Something you have seen, something you may have even used, but never recognized for what it truly carries, because the power was never in the appearance. It was always in the assignment. And its assignment is purification. Not just physical cleansing, but spiritual disruption. This is why in ancient encounters, purification always came before manifestation. Before breakthrough, there was cleansing. Before elevation, there was separation. Because what is unclean cannot sustain what is holy. And this is where many battles are delayed. Not denied, delayed, because contamination blocks flow. Spiritual contamination creates resistance. It slows things down. It distorts clarity. It interferes with direction. And you begin to feel it: confusion in decisions, delays that don't make sense, cycles that refuse to break. It is not always attack. Sometimes it is interference. And interference must be removed, not ignored. This is why what you are about to understand carries such weight. Because this is not about superstition. This is about alignment. There are substances created by God that carry natural cleansing properties. But beyond that, they carry symbolic authority. When used with intention, they become a point of agreement, a declaration that you are rejecting contamination and choosing alignment. And that agreement activates something deeper, because the spirit responds to intention, not empty action, but conscious alignment. This is why two people can do the same thing and only one experiences transformation. Because one understands and the other imitates. Understanding activates, imitation delays. So what is this thing that has been overlooked? It is not complex. It is not hidden in mystery. It is something ancient, something consistent, something that has always been associated with cleansing, preservation, and separation. And when taken into the body, it does not just pass through, it interacts. It begins to shift internal conditions. It begins to create an environment that is hostile to what should not remain. This is why the enemy prefers you distracted by complicated solutions, because simplicity exposes deception. You have been taught to look far when the answer was near, to search deeply when the truth was already present. And this is how delay happens. Not because the solution is absent, but because recognition is missing. But now, recognition is being restored, because you are beginning to see that not everything powerful is loud. Some things are quiet, but carry undeniable authority. And once you begin to apply this with awareness, with discipline, with intention, you will notice shifts, not imaginary shifts. Clarity where there was confusion, lightness where there was heaviness, movement where there was stagnation, because you are no longer feeding interference. You are confronting it, and confrontation changes outcomes. This is why consistency matters, because one moment of alignment is powerful, but repeated alignment establishes dominion, and dominion is what the enemy resists. Because once you take authority, you are no longer a victim of cycles. You become the one who breaks them. But hear this clearly. This is not a ritual. This is not magic. This is alignment with what was already created to function in your favor. The power is not in the object alone. The power is in your understanding, your intention, and your agreement with truth. And once that agreement is established, things begin to shift, because darkness cannot remain where alignment is sustained. It may try to resist, it may try to delay, but it cannot dominate, not anymore. Because you are no longer operating in ignorance. You are moving with awareness, with intention, with authority. And that changes everything. There is a moment when everything shifts, not gradually, not slowly, but suddenly. A moment where what held you loses its grip. What followed you stops tracking you. What delayed you can no longer find access. That moment is triggered by alignment, because cycles do not break randomly. They break when patterns are interrupted. And this is where many people miss it. They want freedom, but they protect the patterns that sustain bondage. They want breakthrough, but they resist the discipline that activates it. And so the cycle continues, not because it is powerful, but because it is permitted. Permission is the hidden key. The enemy does not always force entry, it waits for agreement. Agreement through habits, agreement through ignorance, agreement through repetition. And once agreement is established, it builds cycles. Cycles that look normal but produce limitation. Cycles that feel familiar but carry restriction. And over time, those cycles begin to define your life. You start expecting delay. You start preparing for disappointment. You start accepting what you were meant to overcome. That is how deep cycles can go. They don't just affect outcomes, they shape expectations. And once your expectation is shaped, your resistance weakens because you stop fighting what you believe is normal. But hear this clearly. What you have been experiencing is not normal. It is a pattern, and patterns can be broken, but only when they are confronted, not ignored, not tolerated, confronted. This is where intentional action becomes powerful, because when you begin to apply what you now understand, you are not just doing something physical, you are making a statement, a declaration that the pattern ends here, that the cycle stops now, that what has been operating no longer has permission. And that declaration carries weight because when intention aligns with action, authority is released and authority changes environments. This is why consistency is critical, because cycles were not built in one day, they were reinforced repeatedly. So breaking them requires repeated disruption, repeated alignment, repeated authority. And as you remain consistent, something begins to happen. The resistance weakens, the interference reduces, the heaviness lifts, because what was sustained is no longer being fed. You are no longer maintaining the environment that allowed it to exist. And without environment, it cannot survive. This is why some people experience sudden shifts after consistent alignment, because there comes a point where the system collapses, where the pattern breaks, where the cycle ends. And when that happens, everything changes. Opportunities begin to flow. Clarity becomes natural. Peace replaces confusion. Movement replaces delay. And you begin to realize it was never about force. It was about alignments. This is what the enemy tried to hide. Because if you understood this earlier, you would have broken cycles sooner. You would have taken authority earlier. You would have refused patterns that kept you limited. But now, you see it now, you understand it. Now, you are positioned to act, and action is what separates awareness from transformation. Because knowing is not enough. Understanding is not enough. Application is what produces results. This is where many stop. They hear truth, they feel conviction, but they don't act. And without action, nothing changes. The cycle remains. The pattern continues. The limitation persists. But you are not stopping here. You are moving forward. You are applying what you now know. You are becoming intentional. And intention, backed by consistency, produces undeniable results. This is how authority is established. Not in one moment, but in repeated alignment, repeated decisions, repeated actions. And as you continue, you will notice something powerful. The things that once affected you will no longer have the same impact. The patterns that once controlled you will begin to lose influence because you're no longer operating at the same level. You have shifted. And once you shift, everything connected to your previous level loses access. This is the breakthrough point, where what used to follow you can no longer find you, because you are no longer in agreement with what sustained it. And that is how cycles end. Now you are standing at a line most people never reach, because this is the place where knowledge demands a decision. You can go back, ignore what you've seen, return to old patterns, or you can step forward and enforce what you now understand. Because at this level, neutrality is no longer possible. You either align or you drift back into cycles. There is no middle ground. This is why many people hear truth, feel it deeply, but still remain in the same condition. Because they never crossed the line. They never made the decision to act with authority, to enforce change, to become consistent. And without that decision, revelation becomes information, not transformation. But you are not here by accident. You did not come this far to remain the same. Something brought you here. Something positioned you to hear this at this moment, because this is your turning point. The moment where cycles end and authority begins. But understand this clearly. Authority is not a feeling, it is a position you step into through consistent alignment, through intentional action, through disciplined decisions. And once you step into it, you must maintain it. Because what you don't maintain, you eventually lose. This is why consistency is not optional, it is required. Because the moment you become inconsistent, you create gaps. And gaps are opportunities for interference. But when you remain consistent, you close those gaps, you remove access, you establish control. This is how dominion is sustained, not by occasional effort, but by repeated alignment, day after day, decision after decision. And as you do this, something powerful happens. Your sensitivity increases. You begin to notice things you once ignored. You begin to discern patterns you once accepted. You begin to recognize interference before it takes root. This is elevation, where you are no longer reacting but discerning, no longer surviving but governing. And this is what changes everything. Because once you begin to govern, you no longer live at the mercy of cycles. You determine what stays and what leaves. You decide what is allowed and what is rejected. And that decision is backed by authority. This is where the shift becomes permanent, because you are no longer experimenting. You are established, you are rooted, you are consistent. And consistency builds strength. Strength, stability builds dominion. And dominion eliminates cycles. This is why the enemy fights consistency more than anything else. Because once you become consistent, you become unstoppable. Not because of effort alone, because of alignment. And alignment backed by discipline creates results that cannot be reversed. This is the place you are entering now, where what used to be difficult becomes natural, where what used to be a struggle becomes a standard, where what used to control you no longer has influence, because you have shifted completely. And once that shift is complete, there is no going back, only forward, only growth, only increase, because you are no longer operating from the same level of awareness. You are elevated. And elevation changes everything connected to you, your decisions, your patterns, your outcomes. Everything begins to reflect the alignment you now carry. And that alignment becomes your protection, your strength, your advantage. This is not temporary. This is a new standard, a new level, a new reality. And from this point forward, you are no longer reacting to life, you are shaping it. This is where it ends. Every cycle, every delay, every hidden interference breaks now. You are no longer unaware and you are no longer passive. You carry authority and you enforce it without hesitation. What once followed you will not recognize you anymore. What once resisted you will now bow to alignment. Step forward and never return to who you used to be.